"That is my phone," she said loud enough for every passenger in first class to hear, and every head turned not toward her, but toward the small boy in seat 1. A, the one with the notebook and the cracked glasses and the navy polo shirt. That was one size too large, the one who had not moved from that seat since the plane left the gate. The one who was 9 years old and had no idea that the woman 3 rows behind him had spent the last 20 minutes building a cage around him, one quiet, deliberate movement at a time. But we are getting ahead of ourselves, because 20 minutes before that sentence landed in the cabin like a verdict before the heads turned and the silence thickened and a child's hands found something in his own backpack that should not have been there. The morning had been ordinary in every way that Tuesday mornings at Los Angeles International Airport are ordinary, which is to say, loud and crowded and smelling of jet fuel and burnt coffee and the particular exhaustion of people who had set their alarms for hours that should not legally exist. Terminal C was already humming at 6:40 in the morning when the boy arrived at Gate 17, and the gate agent had a line of 30 people ahead of him, and a toddler near the water fountain was crying with the specific commitment of a child who has decided that crying is simply what she does now, and plans to continue indefinitely, and rolling luggage dragged across tile joints in a long, percussive rhythm. And somewhere above it all, a departures board was clicking through its updates with mechanical indifference. And in the middle of all of that, standing alone at the back of the boarding line with a backpack on both shoulders and a worn leather notebook tucked under his left arm, was a 9-year-old boy named Noah Carter. He was 4 feet 4 inches tall, which was slightly short for his age, a fact that had never seemed to bother him particularly. He wore glasses with the small crack along the right lens that his father had promised to fix, but had not gotten around to yet, and a navy blue polo shirt that was one size too large, because his father bought his clothes with room to grow into them, and khaki pants with a crease ironed into each leg, and sneakers that had been cleaned the night before with a toothbrush and a damp cloth until they were as close to white as sneakers that have been worn get. He was not fidgeting. He was not looking around. He was not doing any of the things 9-year-olds do when they are left standing in a crowded airport alone, which is perhaps the first thing a person who was paying attention might have noticed about him, the particular quality of his stillness. The way he stood in that line, the way adults stand in lines when they have learned how to be patient, which most adults have not fully learned, and most children have not yet started. He was reading. The notebook was open to a page covered in numbers and symbols and small, precise handwriting, and his pencil moved slowly across the bottom of the page as he worked through something that had been given to him by a professor at a university whose name he had been asked not to share yet because the program had not been formally announced to the public. He was just a boy in a boarding line at 6:40 in the morning solving a problem that had taken him 11 days to begin and that he was, as of this particular Tuesday, very close to finishing. The gate agent, Patricia Osei, scanned his boarding pass when he reached the front, looked at it, looked at him, looked at it again, and then smiled, warm, genuine, slightly surprised, and said, "First class, young man." "Yes, ma'am," Noah said without looking up from his notebook. "Traveling alone." "Yes, ma'am. My dad checked me in. I have the unaccompanied minor form in my backpack." She scanned the pass. It beeped green. She handed it back and said, "Have a wonderful flight." And Noah tucked the notebook back under his arm and walked down the jet bridge with the quiet, unhurried confidence of a child who has been told something important every single day of his life and has over 9 years of being told it finally and completely believed it. The first time Raymond Carter took his son to an airport. Noah was 5 years old, and the airport was enormous and loud and full of strangers moving in every direction at once. And Raymond had crouched down to his son's level in the middle of the terminal and held his small shoulders in both hands and said very clearly and very seriously, "This world is going to look at you and make a decision before you open your mouth, Noah. Your job is to walk in like you already know the answer." Noah had not fully understood what that meant when he was 5. He understood it better at 7. By 9 he understood it the way he understood the equations in his notebook. not just as a rule to follow, but as a truth with a shape he could feel. He was thinking about that now as he found seat 1A without asking for help, because the seat number was on his boarding pass. And he had read the boarding pass, and he stowed his backpack in the overhead bin with both hands keeping the notebook out, and adjusted his glasses and sat down and opened the notebook to the page he had been working on and continued the equation as if the airport and the boarding process and the other passengers filling the cabin around him were simply weather present, noted irrelevant to the work. His bedroom at home looked at first glance like any 9-year-old's room, a stuffed penguin he'd had since he was 3 arranged carefully on the windowsill, science fair ribbons pinned to a corkboard above his desk, a bookshelf so full of paperbacks that the books had started being stacked horizontally on top of the vertical ones because there was simply no other way to fit them all. But in the corner of that room was a setup that did not belong in a 9-year-old's bedroom by any ordinary accounting. 3 monitors arranged in a precise arc, the middle one displaying code that had taken him 4 months to write, the left one showing a dataset he was analyzing, the right one running a simulation. He had designed himself after reading a paper that his tutor had told him was too advanced and that he had read 3 times anyway, until it was not too advanced anymore. His tutor, a graduate student from UCLA named Dr. Patricia Webb, who had a master's degree in applied mathematics and had taken the tutoring job because she thought it would be straightforward, had lasted 4 months before she called Raymond and said respectfully but directly that Noah had surpassed everything she had to offer, and that the kindest thing she could do for him was tell him so and get out of the way. The program had reached out after Noah submitted a response to an open mathematical challenge posted publicly as an outreach initiative by a research university in Boston. He had not been told there was a prize. He had seen a problem and wanted to solve it. His solution had taken him 11 days and had been described by the program director, Dr. Adeyeze Obi, as the most elegant response from any student under 16 in the program's 22-year history. Raymond Carter had read the acceptance letter alone at the kitchen table at 11 p.m. on a Wednesday night, and he had pressed both hands flat on the table and looked at the ceiling and stayed very still for a long time. He had not told Noah that he had done that. He had given his son a firm handshake the next morning and said, "I'm proud of you." And Noah had pushed his glasses up and said, "I'm going to need more notebooks." Raymond had bought him 4. 3 were packed. 1 was open on his tray table at 30,000 feet. The other first-class passengers boarded around him, and he did not look up. A businessman in a gray suit who smelled of cedar and early mornings. 2 women already deep in a conversation about someone named Helen and what Helen had apparently done at a dinner party that had left everyone at the table speechless. A man who took the window seat in row 2 and immediately put on noise-canceling headphones as if the aircraft itself was an intrusion. Nobody said anything to Noah. Nobody gave him more than a glance. He was just a boy on a plane doing what he always did. And then Diane Holt boarded. She came through the curtain that separated first class from the boarding bridge with the energy of someone who had not slept and had decided somewhere between the alarm and the taxi and the security line that the world owed her a smoother morning than this one, and that she was prepared to collect on that debt from whoever happened to be nearby. She was in her early 50s with platinum blonde hair pulled back in a tight knot at the base of her neck and a cream blazer over a dark silk blouse that probably cost more than most people's car payments, and she rolled her carry-on behind her with practiced efficiency, each wheel clicking sharply against the seams in the jet bridge floor in a rhythm that had the quality of something deliberate, something percussive, the sound of a woman who moved through spaces and expected them to clear. She found her seat, 3B aisle seat, 3rd row of first class, stowed her bag with the brisk efficiency of someone who has done this hundreds of times and finds the entire process beneath her, settled into the seat and opened her laptop. Then she looked up and she saw Noah. He was in 1A, 2 rows ahead of her, and slightly to the left, turned toward the window. The notebook open on the tray table. His small hand moving in that slow, steady way across the bottom of the page, completely absorbed, completely unaware of her or the cabin or anything beyond whatever problem he was working through. She stared at him for a moment, a long moment. Then her laptop closed. Something shifted in her face, not dramatically, not in any way that would have been immediately legible to someone watching, but a settling, a narrowing the expression of a person who has noticed something that does not. In their private accounting of how the world is organized makes sense, and who finds that dissonance not curious, but irritating. She leaned toward the man seated across the aisle from her, Ronald heavy-set glasses deep into a paperback thriller, and said in a voice that was carefully quiet, deliberately conversational, "Excuse me, do you find anything a little unusual up there?" Ronald lowered his book, looked forward. "No," he said. "That child Diane said, nodding toward row 1, alone in 1A. Does that seem right to you?" Ronald looked at Noah, who was writing in his notebook and had no idea anyone was discussing him. "He's just a kid," Ronald said, and went back to his book with the particular finality of a man who is very happy with his thriller and very much not interested in whatever this conversation is becoming. Diane turned away. She was not satisfied. She was also not finished. When the flight attendant, James Okoro, early 30s, close-cropped hair, the professional ease of someone who genuinely likes his job, came through first class with pre-departure beverages, Diane caught his attention with a light touch on the arm and said, "Excuse me, that boy up in 1A, is he a passenger?" James looked at Noah, then back at Diane, keeping his expression carefully neutral. "Of course," he said. "Is there something I can help you with?" "He's alone," Diane said. "A child that age alone in first class. Has his paperwork been properly verified?" "We have several unaccompanied minors on this route," James said in the tone of a man who has answered this exact kind of question before and finds it mildly tiresome. His documentation was verified at the gate. "Is there anything else I can get you before we push back?" Diane held his gaze for a moment, then smiled in a way that didn't reach her eyes and said, "Just a water." "Thank you." James moved on. Diane turned back toward the front of the cabin. Noah still hadn't looked up. The plane finished boarding, the door sealed with a pressurized thud, and the safety demonstration began, and Noah Carter put his pencil down and watched every second of it with the focused attention of a child whose father had told him more than once and with genuine seriousness that you always watch the safety demonstration no matter how many times you have seen it, because the one time you don't watch will be the one time you needed to have watched. The engines deepened. The aircraft pushed back from the gate. Los Angeles slid slowly past the windows and then fell away, and the city below arranged itself into the familiar geometry of distance grids and freeways, and the flat, glittering gray of the Pacific at the edge of everything. And Noah picked up his pencil and returned to the equation, and the world was quiet, and for exactly 14 minutes and 30 seconds, everything on Flight 882 to Boston was perfectly ordinary. Then the seatbelt sign clicked off. Diane Holt stood up. She walked forward through the cabin toward the front lavatory, her eyes ahead. Her pace measured passing Noah's row without looking at him, stepping into the small bathroom at the front of the aircraft and pulling the door shut behind her. Noah did not look up. In seat 4, C, the man who had been sitting very still since boarding registered her movement with the specific quality of attention that does not announce itself. He was Elliot Marsh, 43 years old, and he had been a federal air marshal for 13 years, and in those 13 years he had learned to watch the way a doctor reads a patient. Not just the obvious signals, but the small ones, the ones that arrive slightly before the event, the hesitation before a move, the stress that shifts from general to focused, the body that is doing something it is also trying to make look like something else. Diane's stress had shifted when she saw Noah. He had noticed that the moment she boarded. It had changed quality, become specific, directed in the way stress does when it attaches itself to a purpose rather than simply floating in the air around a person. He reached into his jacket pocket and took out a device that looked to anyone who glanced at it exactly like an ordinary earbud case, and he set it on his tray table, and he pressed one small button, and he began recording. Diane was inside the lavatory for 4 minutes and 19 seconds. She came out. She walked back down the aisle toward her seat. And as she passed row 1, she stumbled a small, entirely plausible stumble, the kind that happens on aircraft every day when turbulence shifts the floor slightly or a heel catches the edge of a carpet seam, and she caught herself with one hand on the top of Noah's headrest, and her other hand dropped toward his overhead bin, which was open slightly because the latch didn't fully catch, and her fingers opened and something small and dark slid down and in, disappearing into the backpack below. Noah looked up at the movement. Diane was already straightening one hand, smoothing her blazer, her eyes forward. "Sorry," she said to no one in particular, the way people say things to no one in particular on airplanes, and she kept walking. Noah watched her go for half a second, then looked back at his notebook. He did not know. He was 9 years old, and he was thinking about prime numbers and the equation on the page, and whether Boston in November would be cold enough to need the jacket his father had insisted on packing in the front pocket of his backpack. In 4C, Elliot Marsh looked at his earbud case and did not move. The footage was already 44 seconds long. It showed everything. He did not know that his backpack now contained a prepaid phone in a black case that had been purchased for cash at a convenience store in Scottsdale, Arizona, 5 weeks earlier, 3 miles from the home of the woman currently settled back into seat 3B, with her laptop open and her expression composed. He did not know that in approximately 12 minutes that same woman was going to stand up in the middle of the first-class cabin and announce that her phone had been stolen and that every head in that cabin was going to turn to him. He did not know that in 40 minutes this aircraft was going to be diverted to Chicago, or that 2 officers were going to board and walk him off the plane while people in that cabin applauded, or that the sound of those hands clapping was going to stay with him long after everything else about this day had faded into the specific dull ache that difficult experiences become when enough time has passed over them. He was 9 years old, and he was thinking about Dr. Adea's Obi, who had emailed him 3 days ago to say that what he had submitted was not just correct, but interesting in a way that made her want to talk to him in person, and who had signed the email with a warmth that surprised him, because he had expected someone who ran a research program to be more formal. He was thinking about the way the equation on the page was starting to resolve the way a shape emerges from fog when you are driving toward it, and how close he was to the place where it would all connect. His teachers had run out of things to teach him by the time he was 7. This had been a logistical problem more than an emotional one for Noah. At least he had simply kept working on his own, following the threads of problems wherever they led. And eventually the problems had led him to papers, and the papers had led him to other papers, and other papers had led him to the challenge that Dr. Obi's program had posted publicly, which he had found at 11:30 on a Friday night, while the rest of the house was asleep, and which had kept him awake until 3:30 in the morning, when he had finally set the notebook aside and lain in the dark with his eyes open, not trying to sleep, just thinking about the shape of the thing. Raymond Carter had known from the time Noah was very small that his son was going to require a kind of tending that most people didn't have language for. Not protection exactly. Raymond was not the kind of man who believed that protecting a black boy from a difficult world meant sheltering him from it. He believed the opposite. He believed that the preparation had to be thorough and early and honest, and that the love had to be loud enough and consistent enough to become the loudest thing in the boy's interior, louder than whatever the world said about him on its worst days. He had spent 9 years doing exactly that, one conversation at a time, one crouched down to eye-level truth at a time, beginning with the morning in the airport when Noah was 5. Noah was not thinking about any of that consciously. He was thinking about the equation. His pencil moved. The cabin hummed. The clouds outside the window sat still and white against a sky that was the deep, uncomplicated blue of high altitude. In 3B, Diane Holt watched the back of his head and waited for the clock to run down. 12 minutes after she sat back down, Diane Holt stood up again. She stood with the specific energy of someone who has been rehearsing something. Her hand going first to her blazer pocket, then to the laptop bag in the seat pocket in front of her, then patting the side of her carry-on in the overhead bin, each gesture slightly more urgent than the last. Her movements sharpening by degrees into something that looked to anyone watching like the unraveling of a woman who has just realized something is missing. "My phone," she said, not loudly, just enough for the nearest passengers to hear, just enough to begin the thing she was beginning. "My phone is gone." The businessman in the gray suit looked up. The two women who had been talking about Helen paused mid-sentence. Ronald put down his thriller for the first time since boarding. Diane's voice climbed a register. "I had it right here before we took off. Someone took my phone." James Okoro came forward from the galley, his expression professionally calm, his voice measured and even. "Ma'am, sometimes things shift in overhead bins during takeoff. Let me help you check." "I know where I put my phone," Diane said, and the flatness in her voice as she said it cut through James's professional calm the way a very cold thing cuts through heat, cleanly and without effort. "I had it in my blazer pocket. It is not there. It was there before we pushed back, and it is not there now." The cabin was listening. The man with the noise-canceling headphones had taken them off. The two women had stopped talking entirely. Ronald had closed his thriller. Noah looked up from his notebook. He saw Diane standing in the aisle, one hand on the headrest of 3A, her posture carrying that particular kind of grieved authority that belongs to people who are accustomed to being taken seriously when they are upset. He saw the passengers around her turning, recalibrating the cabin's attention, organizing itself around her, the way water organizes itself around a stone dropped into it. He felt the change in the air, the way children feel things before they can name them. Not the content of the shift, not yet, but the temperature of it. The way the atmosphere in the cabin had changed from ordinary to charged without anyone saying exactly what had charged it. He looked back down at his notebook. He did not know that the storm had a name. He did not know that the storm had been pointed at him since 6:40 that morning. "Has anyone seen an iPhone?" Diane asked the cabin. "Black case. It was in my pocket." She paused, and in that pause she let her eyes travel forward slowly, deliberately, with the careful performance of a woman who does not want to say what she is about to say, who feels compelled by conscience and reluctance to say it anyway. Past row 2, past the galley entrance to row 1 to seat 1, A to the back of a small boy's head. "Actually," she said, and her voice had changed, register gone softer and more careful. The voice of someone performing reluctance so precisely that it passed for the real thing, if you weren't paying close attention, I wonder. She paused. "Let the word sit. When I walked past earlier, I stumbled. Right by that boy's seat." She looked at James, her expression doing the work of a woman who hates to say this, who has no choice. His overhead bin was open. The cabin was very quiet. Noah's pencil stopped moving. He did not turn around. His father's voice in his head calm, certain the voice that had been placed inside him specifically for moments like this, for the moments when a room was making a decision about him, and the decision was wrong, and he had to find a way to stay still inside it without being broken by it, said, "When people are talking about you, don't give them more to talk about. Stay still. Stay calm. Wait for the truth to surface." He stayed still. He stayed calm. He was 9 years old, and his heart was hammering in the place behind his ribs where the fear lived, and the equations on the page had blurred slightly because his eyes had gone hot in the way they do before tears arrive, and he was fighting that with everything he had because his father had also told him that composure was armor, and right now he needed every piece of it that he had. James Okoro stepped forward from the galley, his voice carefully even keeping himself between the situation and whatever it was trying to become. "Ma'am, let's not make any accusations before we've had a proper chance to search. Let me check the lavatory area." "I'm not making an accusation," Diane said in the tone of someone who is absolutely making an accusation. "I'm simply noting that I stumbled right next to his seat and his bag was open above him." James looked at Noah. Noah was looking straight ahead at the window, his hands folded on top of the closed notebook, his jaw set with the particular tightness of a child who is working very hard at something that isn't visible to the naked eye. The businessman in the gray suit had turned in his seat to look at Noah. The two women were looking. Ronald was looking. The man from row 2 with the headphones was twisted around in his seat looking. And Noah sat in seat 1, a 9 years old, alone with 24 people in the first-class cabin of Flight 882. Deciding something about him using nothing but their eyes and Diane Holt's careful voice. And he counted primes in his head. 2, 3, 5, 7, 11, 13. The way his father had taught him to manage the thing that lived in his chest when the world got too loud and too certain about the wrong things. James walked forward and crouched beside Noah's seat, lowering himself to eye level, his voice dropping to something quieter. "Hey, I'm sure this is nothing but... would you mind if we just took a quick look in your bag? Just to clear this up fast." Noah looked at him. His eyes were steady behind the cracked lens of his glasses, steadier than they had any right to be. "I didn't take anything he said." His voice was small, but it did not waver. "I know," James said, and he sounded like he might actually mean it. "I just want to help clear this up quickly, for everyone." Noah reached up to the overhead bin and pulled his backpack down. He set it on his lap. He unzipped the main compartment. He reached inside, moving past the notebooks, past the folded sheet of paper that was the unaccompanied minor form with his father's phone number on it, past the small wrapped granola bar Raymond had put in there that morning, saying he might get hungry on the plane, and his hand found something that should not have been there. Something flat, rectangular, cold. His face changed. He pulled it out slowly, holding it the way you hold something that has appeared in your hands as if by impossible magic, with total confusion and a creeping dread that arrives before the mind has caught up with what the hands already know. A black phone in a black case. He held it and stared at it, and the cabin was completely silent around him because 24 people were watching a 9-year-old boy hold a phone that he was holding the wrong way. The way you hold something that does not belong to you. The way your body tells the truth about your innocence before your mouth has had the chance to speak it. This was not his phone. He did not have a phone. His father had told him he would get one when he turned 10, which was still 7 months away, and he had accepted this condition without argument because his father's reasoning was always sound, and because he honestly didn't feel the lack of it. This was not his. This was absolutely, certainly, impossibly not his. And yet here it was in his hands while 24 people watched. The silence lasted exactly 2 seconds. Then Diane Holt said clearly and loudly, and with the full weight of a woman who has just been proven right, "That is my phone." The cabin fractured. Multiple voices at once. The businessman said something sharp. One of the women said, "Oh my God," in a voice that carried across the whole cabin. Someone in the rear of first class, who had craned forward to see what was happening, muttered something Noah couldn't make out, but that landed on him like a closed fist. He stole it. That one he heard. "Call the captain." Diane's voice over everything else, steady and deliberate and utterly certain of itself. "Someone needs to call the captain right now." Noah was shaking, not visibly, not in any way that showed on the outside, but in the deep internal place where fear lives, when it has been pushed down far enough and long enough that it stops being fear and starts being something else, something older and colder and much harder to breathe through. "I didn't take it," he said, and his voice was steady, and it cost him everything to make it steady. It was in my bag, but I didn't put it there. I don't know how it got there. I don't have a phone. I'm 9. I don't have a phone. His voice cracked on the last word. Nobody looked at him like that mattered. James Okoro stood in the aisle for a moment, his face carrying the particular expression of a man caught between two versions of a situation and unable in real time to determine which one is true. The pressured, uncertain look of someone who has procedure to follow, and a cabin full of anxious passengers, and a woman making very loud demands, and a child who looks terrified, all of it happening at once, all of it requiring a response. He went to the galley, picked up the interphone, called the cockpit. While he was on the phone, the businessman in the gray suit turned fully around in his seat to look at Noah, studying him with the direct assessing gaze of a man who has already decided something but is willing to at least look at the evidence first. The two women were quiet now, their earlier conversation about Helen completely forgotten, their attention entirely on the small figure in seat 1. A. Ronald had put his thriller in the seat pocket and was watching with an expression that was harder to read, something between discomfort and regret. Noah sat with his hands folded on top of the closed notebook and counted primes in his head, and thought about his father's voice at the security checkpoint that morning, the way Raymond had held his shoulders at arm's length and looked at him for a long moment before letting go, the way he had said, "You belong in every room you walk into," with the particular certainty of a man who has said a thing so many times and believed it so completely that it has stopped being a statement and become a simple fact, the same as the sky being blue or water moving downhill. He thought about the notebook. The equation half finished on the page, how close he was to the moment when everything would connect. The captain's voice came over the PA system, and the words settled into the cabin with a specific weight that Noah felt in his chest before his mind had fully processed them. "Folks, we're going to be making an unscheduled stop in Chicago. We appreciate your patience and apologize for the inconvenience." Noah closed his eyes for exactly 3 seconds. He thought about his father getting the call. He thought about Raymond's face when he found out. He thought about all the things Raymond had spent 9 years preparing him for, and how this particular morning had arrived anyway, the way difficult things always arrive, not announced, not scheduled, not in any form you were entirely ready for. Then he opened his eyes and looked out the window at the clouds below and began counting primes again. In 3B, Diane Holt settled back into her seat with the phone in her hand, and her expression composed the expression of a woman who has done something difficult and feels entirely clean about it, who has acted on principle and is satisfied with the result. She glanced toward the front of the cabin, once toward the back of that small head with the cracked glasses and the slightly too large polo shirt, and her expression did not change. She had not noticed the man in 4C. Elliot Marsh had not moved from his seat since he pressed the button on the earbud case. He had not spoken. He had not taken out his phone. He had not done anything that would draw the attention of anyone in the cabin. He had simply watched everything in the order it happened, with the steady, patient, comprehensive attention of someone who has spent 13 years learning that the most important thing about watching is not what you see, but how completely you see it. His footage was 44 seconds long. It showed Diane Holt's hand entering Noah Carter's overhead bin. It showed her fingers opening. It showed the phone leaving her hand and dropping into the backpack below. It showed her recovering, smoothing her blazer, and walking away. It showed Noah looking up half a second later, confused, uncomprehending, entirely innocent. 44 seconds that contained the entire truth of what had happened on this flight. Elliot had already sent it to the federal server. He was now simply waiting. Elliot Marsh had boarded Flight 882, the way he boarded every flight before most of the other passengers, with a window seat selected specifically for the angle it gave him on the full length of the cabin, with a device in his jacket pocket that looked like an ordinary earbud case, and that he hoped on most flights he would have no reason to use for anything other than its stated purpose. He had been a federal air marshal for 13 years. In that time, he had sat on somewhere north of 4,000 flights, and he had learned in ways that could not be transmitted in a classroom or a training manual how to watch a space, the way a doctor reads a body, not just for the obvious symptoms, but for the small preceding ones, the physiological grammar that arrives before the event, the specific quality of a person's attention when it shifts from general to targeted. Diane Holt's stress had not been unusual when she cleared the boarding bridge. People boarded flights stressed all the time. It was essentially the ambient emotional state of commercial air travel. What had registered was the moment her stress changed quality, the moment it attached itself, became focused, became directed at a specific object in the cabin. That object was Noah Carter. Elliot had noticed that shift before she found her seat. He had watched her look at the boy in 1A and seen what happened to her face when she looked not shock, not confusion, but something more familiar and more troubling. The settling, calculating expression of a person who has found something that doesn't fit the accounting they have in their head for how the world is arranged and has decided to correct the discrepancy. He had begun recording at that point before she stood up, before she walked to the lavatory, before she came back. 3 minutes and 41 seconds of footage before the 44 seconds that showed everything. What those 44 seconds contained was unambiguous to anyone who watched them. The approach, the stumble that was calibrated rather than accidental. The hand dropping at the wrong angle for someone catching their balance. The fingers opening with the deliberate quality of a person releasing something rather than grabbing something. The recovery that was too smooth, too practiced. The walk away that was slightly too measured, slightly too quick to look at anything other than where she was going. He had forwarded the full file to the federal server at 9:06 a.m. with the subject line that was standard for active incidents. Evidence. Flight 882. Incident in progress. He had sent it to his direct supervisor at the Federal Air Marshal Service and to the FBI field liaison he had worked with twice before on cases that had begun similarly with a small thing that turned out to be a large thing dressed in small thing clothing. He had not sent it to local Chicago police. He understood the difference between evidence that needs to be preserved in federal hands and evidence that gets complicated when it moves through too many channels before it's properly secured. He sat back in his seat and folded his hands and watched the remainder of the flight unfold. The confrontation Noah's face when he pulled the phone from his bag, the particular quality of the boy's stillness under the weight of 24 people deciding something about him, the way his composure held when his voice cracked on the word 9, and nobody in that cabin looked at him like that mattered. He watched Diane Holt's face settle into satisfaction. He watched James Okoro make the call to the cockpit with the expression of a man who is doing something he has been told he must do, and who privately hopes it will turn out to have been unnecessary. He watched Noah fold his hands on top of his closed notebook and begin silently to count something with his lips, the slight movement barely visible from where Elliot sat, but visible nonetheless. He recognized what it was. He had seen it before in other forms, in other people in difficult situations. The internal recitation, the thing you repeat to hold on to yourself when the world is trying to take you apart. He did not know it was prime numbers. He found out later. When he did something shifted in his chest that he didn't have easy language for. The wheels touched down in Chicago at 9:47 a.m. The plane rolled toward the gate in the specific slow, grinding way of an aircraft that has been diverted and is arriving somewhere it was not supposed to arrive, and Noah Carter had not moved from seat 1A in 38 minutes. He had not cried. He had not spoken after those last words that cracked in the middle of the word 9. He had closed his notebook, folded his hands on top of it, pushed his glasses up on his nose and sat and counted 2, 3, 5, 7, 11, 13, 17, 19, 23, 29, 31, 37, with his lips moving slightly, barely, the way another child might move his lips while reading to himself, the way a person uses the rhythmic and infinite reliability of a mathematical sequence to hold on to the parts of himself that a difficult situation is trying to pull loose. He was still counting when he heard the cabin door pressurize and felt the aircraft connect to the gate, and he was still counting when Diane Holt turned to the woman in 3A, a stranger she had not spoken to before this morning, and said in a voice carrying the easy, warm confidence of someone who expects appreciation, "I just couldn't let it go." "You understand?" Someone had to say something. The woman in 3A gave a small, uncomfortable nod and looked out the window. Diane didn't seem to notice the discomfort. 2 Chicago airport police officers boarded at 9:52 a.m. One was tall and broad, with the expression of a man who had been told there was a theft and a minor involved and to keep it moving. The other was shorter, quieter, scrolling through his tablet as he walked up the aisle, reviewing whatever information had been relayed from the crew. James met them at the galley. He spoke to them in a low voice. He pointed twice toward row 1. He did not look comfortable doing it, and he did not look uncomfortable in a way that suggested he was going to say so. The taller officer walked to row 1 and stood over Noah's seat. "Son," he said, "I need you to come with me." Noah looked up at him. His eyes were steady. It cost him everything to keep them steady. "I didn't take the phone," he said. "I want to call my father. You can do that at the airport. I need you to come with me now." "She put it in my bag," Noah said. "When she walked past me, her hand went into the bin." "I saw it." The officer's face did not change. "Let's go, son." Noah looked at James. James looked at the floor. Noah picked up his notebook. He stood. He put on his backpack, both straps the way his father had taught him, even when you're upset. Even when your hands are shaking. You put the backpack on properly. He walked off the plane between 2 officers down the aisle, past row 2 and row 3, and past Diane Holt standing in the aisle waiting to deplane, past all the passengers who had watched and decided and said nothing when they could have said something, and out through the curtain and onto the jet bridge. And from somewhere in the middle rows, someone started clapping. Not a lot of people, 3, maybe 4. But in the narrow acoustic tunnel of a first-class cabin, 3 people applauding is not a quiet thing, and the sound of it followed Noah Carter down the jet bridge like a judgment, rhythmic, self-satisfied, entirely certain of itself, the sound of people who believe they have just watched something correct happen and are expressing approval. Diane Holt, stepping into the aisle, heard it and straightened slightly, the involuntary small shift of posture that belongs to someone who has just been publicly validated. She pressed her lips together into something that was almost a smile and was in some indefinable way worse than a smile. She had the expression of a woman who has acted on principle and feels entirely clean about it. She did not know that the footage Elliot Marsh had captured was already on a federal server. She did not know that the gate area of Concourse B was already waiting with 2 federal agents who had received the link 30 minutes ago and watched the 44 seconds and were at this moment not looking at their phones or the departures board, but at the entrance to the jet bridge, waiting for a woman in a cream blazer with platinum blonde hair. She did not know that the clock had been running since before Noah's pencil stopped moving. She would know very soon. The airport security office on the lower level of Concourse B was a room that had held a great many versions of the truth over the years. Versions that were true. Versions that were constructed. Versions that were partially true and partially something else. And it had as a consequence the specific institutional weariness of a space that has processed too many of these without being able to fully distinguish between them in real time. A room where fluorescent lights hummed over a folding table and 2 chairs and a yellow legal pad, and the weight of too many mornings like this one. Detective Howard Birch was 54 years old and had been working airport security investigations for 19 of those years. And he had the patient, slightly worn expression of a man who has sat in this room, in this chair across from this table, more times than he would choose to count. and who has learned that the most important thing about this particular job is not the speed at which you reach conclusions, but the care with which you resist reaching them too early. He sat down across from Noah Carter and set his legal pad on the table and put his reading glasses on. They hung on a small chain around his neck. The glasses, which was either old-fashioned or practical depending on your perspective, and he looked at the boy across the table from him and said, "Okay, Noah, tell me what happened." Noah told him. He told it plainly, without decoration or embellishment, in the same even tone he used for everything the woman in seat 3B had walked past him toward the lavatory at the front of the plane. She had come back, she had stumbled as she passed row 1, her hand had gone into the overhead bin above his seat. He had felt the movement and looked up. She had already been straightening and walking away. He had not thought much of it at the time. He had looked back at his notebook. He had not known until he opened the bag and found the phone that her hand had deposited anything. Birch wrote on the legal pad, "Did anyone else see that happen?" "I don't know," Noah said. "Maybe." A pause. There was a man in 4C. He was watching her. Not like the other passengers were watching. Not like someone watching a thing that's happening, but like someone waiting for a thing that's about to happen. My dad watches things like that sometimes. He says you can tell when someone is paying professional attention. Birch looked up from the legal pad. He studied the child across the table for a long moment. The steady eyes behind the cracked lens, the hands flat on the table, the closed notebook in front of him. "Your dad sounds like a smart man," he said. "He is," Noah said. And for the first time since he had walked off that plane, something in his composure shifted just slightly, just enough to show like a branch that has been holding a weight for a long time and is beginning very quietly to bend. "Can I call him, please?" "Absolutely," Birch said. He turned to the officer near the door. "Get the father's number from the minor form." He turned back to Noah. "We are going to figure this out, okay?" Noah nodded. His hands were still flat on the table. His notebook was in front of him, closed. That was the detail that stayed with Birch later when he was going over the morning in his mind the way he went over all of his mornings. The closed notebook. Because he had asked the officer at the door about the boy while Noah was being brought in, and the officer had mentioned that the kid had been doing math on the plane, that another passenger had said he'd been writing in a notebook the whole flight, and now the notebook sat in front of him closed untouched since the plane had landed. Noah Carter, who had been working through a mathematical problem at 6:40 in the morning in a boarding line, who had continued working through it at 30,000 feet while other passengers settled in and fell asleep and watched movies and ate pretzels, had not opened his notebook since the moment this situation began. That detail said more to Howard Birch about the quality of this child's distress than anything Noah had said out loud. "The call's going through now," the officer at the door said. Birch slid the phone across the table. Noah picked it up with both hands, and his face did not change, but something behind it did a shift in the quality of his stillness, from the stillness of forced composure to the stillness of someone who is about to be allowed for the first time to simply feel whatever they are actually feeling. He pressed the phone to his ear. He said, "Dad." Raymond Carter was in the middle of a presentation review in his Atlanta office when his assistant Claudette knocked twice and came in without waiting for an answer, which she had never done in 3 years of working for him, not once, not even on the day the server crashed, and they lost 6 hours of work right before a deadline. She never came in without waiting. He was out of his chair and moving toward the door before she finished the first sentence. He was in the hallway with his phone to his ear within 14 seconds. The voice on the phone identified itself as an officer at Chicago O'Hare Airport, and the officer said Raymond's son was there, that there had been an incident on the flight, that Noah was safe and not hurt, but that they needed Raymond to put him on, Raymond said. A brief pause, some movement on the other end. And then Noah's voice. Dad's small, careful, steady in the way it was steady only when steadiness was costing him something. Raymond closed his eyes. He was standing in the hallway outside his conference room, and his free hand found the wall beside him and pressed flat against it. Because without that wall, he was not entirely certain he would stay entirely upright. And Raymond Carter was not a man who allowed himself to not be upright in hallways where people could see him, or frankly in any hallway at all. "I'm here," he said. "I've got you. You're okay." "I didn't do it, Dad." Noah's voice so steady it almost held. "Almost." She planted it. She walked past my seat and her hand went into my bag, and I didn't know until I reached in and found the phone. "I didn't put it there. I swear I didn't." "I know," Raymond said. He didn't know yet, not in the verifiable evidentiary sense. But he knew in the only sense that mattered in that moment, the sense that lived in his chest like something structural, something weight-bearing. He had spent 9 years watching his son move through the world, and he knew with the specific, unshakable certainty of a father who has been paying close attention that what Noah was telling him was true. "Don't say another word to anyone in that room without me there," he said. "Can you do that?" "Yes." "Good. I'm coming. I love you." "I love you too, Dad." Raymond hung up. Raymond. He stood in the hallway for exactly 3 seconds, which was the amount of time he permitted himself before the part of his mind that organized crises and produced action took over from the part that was a father standing in a hallway trying to remember how to breathe. Then he pulled up his contacts. Clarence Webb. First, his security coordinator, former FBI, the man Raymond called when a situation had moved beyond the domain of normal response. Clarence picked up on the first ring and had 2 words in "I'm listening" before Raymond started talking. Then Patricia Anand, his federal litigator who had argued before the Supreme Court on 2 separate occasions, and who had a reputation in legal circles for being depending on who you talked to, either extraordinarily thorough or genuinely frightening, which was more or less the same thing from different angles. Patricia picked up on the second ring. She said, where and when before Raymond had finished the first sentence, then his pilot. He was wheels up from Atlanta in under an hour, and during the flight he sat very still in the small leather seat, and did not look at his phone, and did not speak to anyone, and looked out the window at the country below with the specific focused quiet of a man who is conserving something not calm exactly, but the controlled thing that lives underneath, where calm usually is the thing that is colder and more deliberate and considerably more dangerous. He had spent 9 years building his son strong enough for a world that was going to try to knock him down. He had done that work carefully and consistently, and with the full understanding that the morning he was now flying toward had always been a possibility that the specific form it took would be a surprise, but that something like it at some point in some form was the kind of thing you had to prepare for. He had hoped to be wrong about that. He had spent 9 years hoping to be wrong, and he had done the preparation anyway because hope was not a strategy, and Raymond Carter was above all other things a man who understood the difference between what he hoped and what he planned for. Patricia called at cruising altitude. She said the airline's cabin footage was being compiled, which she translated for Raymond as meaning no one had gotten to it yet. She said she had a federal contact who was already making inquiries. She said the situation had a shape to it that she recognized, and that the shape was one that in her experience favored them. "How is he?" she said near the end of the call. Raymond was quiet for a moment. "He's counting primes," he said. A pause. "I'm sorry. It's what he does when he needs to stay calm. He counts prime numbers." Patricia said nothing for a moment. "Then we're going to take care of this Raymond." "Yes," Raymond said. "We are." Howard Birch had been in this job long enough to know that the footage was the thing that in situations like this one where you had a child's word against an adult's and a phone found in a backpack and a cabin full of passengers who had decided something with their eyes before anyone had done the work of finding out what was actually true. The footage was the only thing that cut through all of it cleanly. He had requested the airline's cabin security footage twice. The second request had gone to the ground operations supervisor, a woman named Carla Tate, who had said it was being pulled together in the way that people say things when the thing in question is not actually being pulled together yet, but they would like you to believe that it is. Birch was composing his third request when the phone on his desk rang with an outside line. "Detective Birch," he said. "This is Federal Air Marshal Elliot Marsh. I was on Flight 882 this morning. I have footage of the entire incident involving the minor in Seat 1A, and I need to walk you through what's on it before you take another step in this investigation." Birch's pen stopped moving. "How long is the footage?" 44 seconds. "I've already uploaded it to the federal server. I'm sending you the direct access link right now. You started recording before any incident was reported." Before she stood up the first time, Marsh said, "Behavioral indicators. I can explain all of it in my formal statement, which I'll be giving to the FBI field office this afternoon. But you need to watch this before anything else happens in that room." Birch looked at his email. The link was already there. The message had arrived while they were talking. He clicked it. The video loaded. He pressed play. He watched it once. He watched it a second time more slowly, pausing at the moment the hand dropped and the fingers opened. He set down his pen. He took off his reading glasses. He pressed the bridge of his nose between two fingers and sat that way for a long moment with the specific stillness of a man who is absorbing the full weight of what he is now holding. "Lord have mercy," he said quietly to no one in particular. He stood up, walked to the table, looked at Noah, who was looking back at him from across the folding table with the steady, slightly exhausted eyes of a child who has been telling the truth for an hour and 20 minutes and is still patiently waiting for it to matter. "I'll be right back," Birch said, and his voice had changed. There was gravity in it now, the specific gravity of consequence, the weight of a man who has just shifted from investigating a situation to understanding it. He walked out and spoke to 2 officers in the hallway for 3 minutes. Those officers walked down the hall and out into the main terminal. Birch walked back into the room. He sat down. He looked at Noah for a moment before he spoke. He thought about how to do this right. How to say what needed to be said to a 9-year-old boy who had been through the morning he had been through and who deserved to have someone be honest with him without making the honesty feel like an afterthought. "Noah," he said, "we have video footage of everything that happened on that plane. All of it." He paused. "You were telling the truth." Noah's shoulders, which had been locked in a controlled architectural tightness since the moment he walked off the plane, dropped approximately half an inch. It was not relief exactly. It was something more complicated and more exhausting than relief, the specific weight of being believed after being disbelieved, which is not the same thing as simply being fine, which is a different thing entirely from the moment before the disbelief began and which carries its own kind of cost that most people don't account for because they have never had to. "I know. I was," Noah said. Birch held his gaze. He did not look away. "I know you know," he said. "I'm sorry it took us this long to catch up to you." Noah looked at him for a moment. Then he looked down at his notebook. He did not open it, but his hand moved to rest on the cover palm flat, as if making contact with something familiar in a room that had been nothing but unfamiliar for the past hour and 23 minutes. Outside the room, Howard Birch knew 2 federal agents were walking through the terminal toward the lounge, where a woman in a cream blazer was on her second cup of coffee and her third self-congratulatory phone call, completely unaware that the 44 seconds she had not noticed being recorded were already making their way through the federal system with her name attached to them. The lounge was the kind of space that was designed to feel like a reprieve from the airport. Softer lighting, real chairs, coffee served in actual cups rather than paper ones, and Diane Holt had claimed a corner seat near the window with the ease of someone who has been a frequent flyer long enough to know which airports have the good lounges and which have the ones that are just slightly nicer waiting rooms. She was on her second coffee and her second phone call about the incident, and she was recounting it the same way she had recounted it the first time, with the measured, self-assured energy of a person who has acted on principle and expects to be understood as having done so. Someone had to say something, she was saying. The flight attendant confirmed the paperwork, but you could see he wasn't comfortable with the situation either. These things get waved through because nobody wants the confrontation, and I wasn't willing to let it go. Her colleague on the other end of the line had a slightly hedged quality to his responses that Diane was choosing not to engage with. But they confirmed it was your phone, he said carefully. Found in his bag. Of course they confirmed it. It was in his bag, wasn't it? She set down her coffee cup and looked out the window at the runway where aircraft were moving in their slow, procedural way across the gray morning. The officers were professional about it. Took him right off the plane. 2 officers came on board, handled it properly. Her colleague said something else, something cautious and low, and Diane was formulating a response when she noticed the 2 men near the lounge entrance. They were not looking at their phones. They were not looking at the departures board. They were not doing any of the things people do in airport lounges. They were standing very still near the entrance, and they were looking at her. And one of them was saying something to the other, and then both of them started walking in her direction with the particular measured pace of people who are not in a hurry because they don't need to be. "I'll call you back," Diane said, and ended the call. The first man reached her table and held up a badge. Not airport security. Not airline staff. The word federal had a weight to it that the lounge's soft lighting and good coffee had not prepared her for. Miss Holt. A pause. "We need you to come with us. What is this about?" Her voice had lost some quality of certainty that had been present in it all morning. Not dramatically absent, but subtly noticeably different, the way a room feels different when a window has been closed. "We have some questions about an incident on Flight 882. I was the victim," she said. "That child stole my phone." The agent's voice remained exactly level, not cold, not warm, simply even in a way that was more unsettling than either. "We have video footage of the entire incident, Miss Holt. We'd like to show it to you." She picked up her bag. She stood. She walked with them. 3 corridors and 2 security doors away in a small room with a screen and a table and 2 chairs, Diane Holt sat down and watched 44 seconds of footage showing her own hand entering a 9-year-old boy's backpack and releasing a phone into it. She watched it once. The room was very quiet. That could be interpreted in multiple ways, she said. The agent across from her did not raise his voice. He did not change his expression. He looked at his tablet and read from it in the same level, unhurried tone filing a false police report. Child endangerment interference with airline operations making a false statement to a federal officer, and one more deliberate endangerment of a minor on an interstate commercial aircraft. Additionally, he said, we have identified the device. It's a prepaid phone purchased with cash. We have the purchase location. He set the tablet on the table screen facing her. The purchase was made 5 weeks ago. The store is approximately 3 miles from your home address in Scottsdale. The color left Diane Holt's face in a way that was slow and thorough and total, like something draining. "I'd like an attorney," she said. "That is your right," the agent said. He slid a phone across the table. "Please take whatever time you need." He stood and walked to the door and paused there. "The boy you had removed from that plane," he said without turning around. "He's 9 years old. He was flying alone to participate in a mathematics research program. He was the youngest person ever considered for it." He left the room. Diane Holt sat alone with the phone and the paused footage and the sound of that last sentence rearranging itself in the air around her. Raymond Carter's plane touched down at O'Hare at 11:04 a.m., and he was descending the steps before the engines had finished winding down, moving through the tarmac in the particular way of a man whose entire nervous system has been reorganized around a single purpose. and who does not have patience in this moment for anything that is not that purpose. Patricia Anand was beside him, her briefcase already open, already fielding calls from 2 different numbers simultaneously, already doing the thing she did, which was convert chaos into legal architecture with the focused precision of someone who had long ago stopped finding the conversion difficult. Clarence Webb was on Raymond's other side, scanning the terminal with the trained attention of someone whose job was to identify before Raymond did anything in the environment that required managing. Raymond did not slow down until he pushed open the door of the security office on the lower level of Concourse B and saw his son. Noah was still at the table. He still had his notebook. The notebook was still closed. And when the door opened and Noah's eyes found his father in the doorway, something happened to Noah. Carter's face. Something came undone quietly and completely. The specific internal unhooking that happens when the one person in the world you have been holding yourself together for finally arrives, and you no longer need to hold yourself together alone. He let go of the armor. All of it. Just for one moment. The way you can only do with one specific person in the world. The person whose job it has been for as long as you can remember to be the place where the armor isn't necessary. Raymond was across the room in 4 steps. He pulled his son against him with both arms tight, the way you hold something you almost lost without fully knowing you were losing it, and Noah pressed his face against his father's chest and didn't cry. He was his father's son, and his father did not cry in front of people either. It was not a family trait, but he held on with both hands, and his shoulders, which had been carrying the weight of the past several hours in their tightness, finally fully let go. After a moment, Raymond pulled back. He held Noah's face in both hands and looked at him carefully. The way you look at something precious that has survived something it should not have had to survive, looking for damage, looking for what's still intact. He saw the faint redness on his son's wrists where the handcuffs had been. His jaw set, not visibly, not in any dramatic way. Just the very small, very controlled movement of a man putting something in a specific place inside himself where it could be dealt with at the appropriate time and in the appropriate manner. "Did they apologize?" Raymond said. "Detective Birch did," Noah said. "He said he owed me one." From the doorway, Patricia said without looking up from her briefcase. "He owes considerably more than one." Howard Birch stepped forward and extended his hand to Raymond. His handshake was offered with the slightly uncomfortable directness of a man who knows he is responsible in part for what happened in this room this morning and who is not trying to minimize that. "Mr. Carter, your son is one of the most composed individuals I have ever had in this office. You have raised someone remarkable." Raymond shook his hand. His grip was measured and deliberate. "Where is she?" "Federal agents have her in custody. She's been formally detained pending arraignment." Birch held Raymond's gaze without flinching. "The air marshal's footage is in federal hands. The charges are already being prepared. This is not going to be managed or minimized or made to disappear." Raymond looked at Noah. Noah was watching his father with those steady eyes behind the cracked lens, reading him the way he read everything carefully, looking for the shape of what was true underneath what was being said. "It's not over yet," Raymond said. He said it to Noah, not to Birch, not to Patricia, not to Clarence, to his son and only his son. "But we are through the hard part." Noah considered that. Then he reached across the table and picked up his notebook. He opened it. He found the page with the half-finished equation, the one he had been working on since 6:40 that morning in the boarding line, the one that had been sitting there half-finished through the confrontation and the diversion and the officers and the interrogation room and all of it, and he picked up the pencil, and he began to write. Raymond Carter stood at the edge of the room and watched his son's small fingers move across the page and felt something happen in his chest, a quiet, complicated breaking open that was simultaneously grief and pride and fury and love, all of it pressed together into a single feeling that had no precise name and had been living in some form in his chest since the morning Noah was born, and Raymond had first understood with absolute and irreversible clarity exactly what it meant to love someone who was going to move through a world that was not always going to be ready for what he was. Patricia touched his arm lightly. "Raymond, we should talk about the next steps." "Give me a minute," he said. He stood there for one more minute watching his son write, and he did not say anything else, and he did not need to. Miriam Adeyemi was 61 years old, recently retired after 32 years as a school librarian in Cincinnati, and she had been sitting in Seat 2, B of Flight 882, directly behind Noah Carter since the boarding process began, and she had seen everything. She had seen the woman in 3B lean across the aisle and speak to the man with the thriller. She had seen the first trip to the lavatory and the return, and the stumble that she had felt in her bones was not a stumble. She had seen the phone appear in Noah's hands and the look on his face when it appeared there. She had seen the officers board, and she had seen them walk a 9-year-old boy off a plane while people behind her clapped. She had spent the entire taxi to the gate composing a Facebook post. She was 61 years old, and she had 380 followers, and she had never written a post that more than a few dozen people saw. And she typed the whole thing on her phone with her fingers shaking slightly and posted it at 10:52 a.m. while the plane was still at the gate, because she needed to do something with what she had seen, and this was the only thing she had that felt like doing something. By noon, it had been shared 53,000 times. By 12:30, it had been picked up by 2 major news platforms. By 1:15, a 28-second clip, shot by a passenger in the rear of first class, had emerged online, shaky, low resolution, but clear enough to show a small boy being walked off a plane by 2 officers while scattered applause followed him down the aisle. And that clip was spreading the way things spread when they touched something that was already raw and waiting to be touched. By 1:45, 3 separate journalists had confirmed the flight number, the diversion, and the involvement of federal authorities. Raymond's communications director, Sandra Park, called at 1:22. "It's out," she said. "Completely out. Multiple platforms. The clip has been shared over 100,000 times in the last 40 minutes. Raymond already knew. His phone had been ringing steadily since 12:50, and he had been declining the calls with the systematic efficiency of a man who has made a decision about something. He silenced the phone, turned to Noah, and said, "This is about to become very big. Are you okay?" Noah thought about it genuinely, without rushing in the way he considered everything. "I don't want to be on the news," he said. "I understand. But your story is already out there. So we have a choice. We can let other people tell it, or we can tell it ourselves." Raymond paused. "What do you want to do?" Noah looked at his notebook, then at his father. "Tell it ourselves," he said, "but tell it right." Patricia had a statement drafted in 38 minutes. 11 sentences. It described Noah as a 9-year-old mathematics student traveling alone to a research program, the youngest participant ever considered, who had been falsely accused, detained, and placed in restraints as the direct result of a deliberate act by another passenger. It confirmed that federal authorities had taken formal action and that full legal proceedings were underway. The final sentence read, "My son did nothing wrong. He was treated as a suspect because of how he looked, and the system that should have protected him failed him. We intend to make certain that failure has consequences." Patricia had written that line. Raymond had read it once and nodded without changing a word. Within an hour of release, it had been quoted in 9 news stories. Within 2 hours, Noah's name was trending nationally. Civil rights attorneys were posting breakdowns of the legal issues. Educators were sharing the story with hashtags that grew faster than anyone could track. In the federal holding room, a correctional officer slid a printed copy of the statement under the door. Diane Holt's attorney, Gerald Park Federal Defense, 20 years of experience, expensive and fast. Read it first, then slid it across the table to his client. Diane read it. Her face moved through several expressions in approximately 5 seconds. Gerald Park said very quietly and without preamble, "Victor Mitchell is worth approximately." "Raymond," Diane said. "Raymond Carter," Gerald confirmed. He folded his hands on the table. "He is a tech entrepreneur with a significant public profile and a documented history of work in educational equity. He has a federal litigator who argued before the Supreme Court." He paused. "You planted a phone in his 9-year-old son's backpack on a commercial flight." Diane said nothing. "I need you to understand," Gerald said, "the full dimensions of what we are now dealing with. The FBI field office in Chicago occupied 3 floors of a building on West Monroe Street that had the particular institutional gravity of a place where significant things regularly happen and nobody talks about most of them, and the conference room where Elliot Marsh sat that afternoon had a table long enough to seat 12 and currently seated 2 agents from the field office, a liaison from the Federal Air Marshal Service, and at the far end of the table, a woman named Deputy Director Constance Yao, who had flown in from Washington that morning and who had introduced herself to exactly no one in the room, but whose presence communicated clearly, and without the need for introduction, that the federal interest in this particular case was not routine. Elliot gave his statement the way he gave everything, in order precisely without inflation or deflation, giving each detail its accurate weight and no more. He began with boarding. He described the quality of Diane Holt's stress when she cleared the bridge general. At first, the ambient anxiety of a person who has not slept and is running late and finds airports objectionable, which described a significant percentage of the traveling public. Then the moment she saw Noah Carter in seat 1A and the way her stress changed, not intensified exactly, but focused the way a lens focuses light, narrowing from diffuse to directed, from general to specific. "Can you characterize that change more precisely?" Deputy Director Yao asked. Her voice was even and unhurried, the voice of someone who has all day. "In my experience," Elliot said, "there's a specific quality to stress that has a target. It's different from stress that's just present in a person. When stress attaches to something, when it becomes about something rather than just being a general state, the body changes. The attention changes. What she did when she saw the boy was not surprise. It was not confusion. It was calculation. I've seen that expression before in very different contexts. It always means something is about to happen. Yao wrote something. The recording. You began before any incident was reported. Before she went to the lavatory the first time. What made you start recording at that point?" Elliot considered the question. "The first trip to the lavatory was too purposeful for the timing," he said. "We had been in the air for less than 15 minutes. The seatbelt sign had just gone off. She hadn't eaten or drunk anything. She had no reason to go to the front lavatory when there was one closer to her seat, unless the reason wasn't the lavatory." He paused. "And her path when she walked back was slightly different from her path going forward. A very small difference. But when you've been watching these things for 13 years, small differences are what you watch for." And the boy Yao said, "Before the incident." What was he doing? "Solving equations," Elliot said. He said it simply. 2 words. But they carried a different weight in the room than anything else he had said, and everyone in the room felt it, and nobody acknowledged it, and the room was briefly quiet in the way rooms go quiet when something true has just been said that nobody quite knows what to do with. He didn't look up when she first walked past. Elliot continued. He didn't look up during boarding. He didn't look at the other passengers. He was working. He had his notebook open on the tray table and his pencil moving from the moment he sat down. He was completely absorbed in what he was doing. He stopped. Started again, slightly differently. "I want to say something for the official record. He's 9 years old. That needs to be said clearly in an official setting. Because what happened to him on that aircraft was deliberate, and it was directed at a child who had done absolutely nothing except occupy a seat that someone else decided he had no right to be in. That child spent 38 minutes on a diverted plane being treated like a criminal because a grown adult made a choice. That choice should have consequences. That's why I'm here. Constance Yao looked at him for a long moment after he finished. Then she wrote something at the bottom of her legal pad and underlined it twice. She did not say what it was. She did not need to. The full statement took 90 minutes. When it was done, Elliot signed it and shook hands with the agents and walked out of the building into the gray Chicago afternoon and stood on the sidewalk for a moment without moving. He thought about a 9-year-old boy in a window seat pencil moving across a page, solving something that adults with graduate degrees had not managed to solve completely. Unaware that the person 3 rows behind him had already decided that his presence in that seat required correction. He thought about Noah's voice cracking on the word 9 while 24 people looked at him and decided that the crack didn't matter. He took out his phone. He didn't call anyone. He stood on the sidewalk for another moment, and then he walked toward his car, and on the way he made one decision that he hadn't entirely planned to make, but that once he had made it, felt like the only thing that made sense. Patricia Anand received the detail at 2:47 p.m. through her federal contact, a woman named Agent Lisa Dorn at the FBI field office who had been following the case with the specific focus of someone who understands early that a case has the potential to become much larger than its initial shape suggests. The prepaid phone had been traced to a purchase at a convenience store on East Camelback Road in Scottsdale, Arizona. The purchase had been made with cash, which was why it had taken several hours to locate. There was no digital transaction record, no credit card number, nothing that links a phone to a person the way ordinary commerce does. What there was a security camera. The store had a camera that covered the counter, and the store had cooperated with the federal request for footage, and the footage showed without ambiguity a woman in a dark blouse with platinum blonde hair purchasing a prepaid phone and paying for it in cash. The purchase had been made 37 days before Flight 882. Patricia called Raymond immediately. He was in the hallway outside the security office, standing with a cup of coffee that had gone cold, because he kept forgetting to drink it, watching through the small window in the door, as Noah worked on the equation at the table inside the pencil, moving in that steady, unhurried rhythm that meant his mind had found its footing and was moving fast. Patricia said, she bought it 5 weeks before the flight. Cash purchase 3 miles from her home. We have store security footage confirming the buyer. Raymond absorbed this. She planned this, he said. It was not a question. The federal prosecutor will argue exactly that, Patricia said, and they'll be arguing it with camera footage from the convenience store. 44 seconds of footage from the aircraft, the testimony of a federal air marshal, and 6 witness statements from passengers who have already contacted the investigation. A pause. This is not a case that survives trial, Raymond. This is a case that ends in one of 2 ways, guilty plea or conviction. There is no third option. Raymond was quiet for a moment. He looked through the window at his son, who was bent over the notebook with the same complete absorption he brought to everything he worked on, unaware that his father was standing outside the door looking at him with an expression that had no clean category. He had built Noah strong. He had done that work deliberately and carefully, and with the full understanding that strength was not protection, that no amount of preparation made a black boy in America immune to the specific kind of morning Noah had just had. He had known that. He had done the work anyway. What he had not entirely planned for, what surprised him now in a way that had an edge of grief in it alongside everything else, was how much it still hurt even after all the preparation. How much it hurt to be right about the necessity of the preparation. How much he had hoped, even knowing better that the morning would never actually arrive. I want to file before the week is out, he said. I'm already drafting, Patricia said. I'll have a preliminary structure to you by tonight. Patricia. He paused. watched Noah close the notebook, then open it again to a different page, making a small note in the margin. Make sure everything that happened to him is documented, every detail. I don't want a single thing minimized in the filing. Nothing will be minimized, she said. I can promise you that. He hung up, stood in the hallway for another moment. Then he pushed open the door and went back in and sat beside his son and didn't say anything about what Patricia had just told him. He just sat. And after a moment, Noah looked up from the notebook and said, Are we going to Boston with the particular matter-of-fact directness of a child who has processed the morning sufficiently to know that the morning does not get to change the destination? Do you want to go? Raymond said. Noah thought about it. Yes. I was close to finishing the equation when it happened. I want to finish it. Raymond looked at his son. He thought about the equation sitting half-finished on the page, while Noah had been counting primes in this room, holding himself together with mathematics the way other children hold themselves together with other things. He thought about what it said about Noah that the first thing he wanted on the other side of the worst morning of his 9 years was to go back to the problem and finish it. Then we are going to Boston? Raymond said. Noah adjusted his glasses, looked back at the notebook. After a moment, quietly almost to himself, she didn't stop me. It was not a boast. It was not a declaration. It was just a fact stated plainly the way Noah stated all facts directly without decoration in the voice of someone who has looked at a thing clearly and is simply reporting what he sees. Raymond said nothing. He looked at his son's profile, the cracked lens, the slight furrow of concentration, the pencil already moving again, and he put the grief in the place where he kept things that needed to be carried carefully, and he let the pride be what filled the room. Gerald Park had been practicing federal defense law for 20 years, and he was expensive and fast, and had over the course of those 20 years acquired a reputation for being able to look at a bad situation and find, if not a way out, then at least a way through a path that preserved something even when most of the things that could be preserved had already been compromised. He had Diane Holt in a private room within 8 minutes of clearing security. The door closed his briefcase open on the table, a legal pad in front of him, and a pen in his hand. And he said, without sitting down, Tell me everything. Do not edit. Do not give me the version you want me to hear. Give me the facts in the order they happened. Diane told him. She told it the way a person tells something when they are still at some level composing the version they want to believe, not lying exactly, but arranging, selecting, choosing which details to give weight to and which to treat as peripheral. Gerald recognized this. He let her finish. Then he said, The video. It's not what it looks like, Diane said. Gerald set down his pen. He had been a defense attorney for 20 years, and he had a rule about the phrase, It's not what it looks like, which was that it always was exactly what it looked like. And the question was not whether it looked like what it was, but whether what it was survivable. The video shows your hand entering a miner's overhead bin, he said, and releasing an object that was subsequently found in the miner's bag and identified as the phone you reported stolen. A federal air marshal recorded this. It is in federal possession. He has given a formal statement. He looked at her steadily. What it looks like is exactly what it is. I need you to understand that before we have any further conversation. I panicked, Diane said. Her voice had lost the certainty it had carried all morning. Not suddenly, not dramatically, but progressively, the way certainty goes when the structure that was holding it up gets removed. I saw him sitting there and something in me. She stopped, started again differently. I don't know exactly why I had the phone. I bought it a while ago. I've been under a lot of pressure at work. I wasn't sleeping. I wasn't thinking clearly. Gerald opened a fresh page on the legal pad. The phone was purchased 37 days before this flight, with cash, at a store 3 miles from your home address. He looked at her. The prosecution will argue that constitutes preparation. that you boarded that flight with the specific intent to use that phone against someone. The someone, they will argue, was whoever happened to be sitting in first class in a way that you found objectionable. Diane was quiet. "Is there anything else," Gerald said carefully, "that I need to know before we go further? Anything from your past professional history, prior complaints, anything of that nature that the prosecution might find and use to establish that this was not an isolated incident?" The pause was half a second too long. In Gerald Park's experience, a pause of that precise length in response to that particular question meant yes. "There may be something," Diane said. "From work, about 18 months ago. There was a complaint I filed against an employee." Gerald put down the pen. "Tell me," he said. 18 months earlier, at the financial advisory firm in Scottsdale, where Diane Holt held a senior position, she had filed a formal misconduct complaint against a junior analyst named Calvin Osei, 27 years old, 2 years out of college black, whom she had accused of accessing files on her computer without authorization during a period when she claimed she had left her workstation unlocked. The firm had investigated. They had reviewed access logs, interviewed colleagues, examined the digital record of everything that had happened on Diane's workstation during the relevant period. After 3 weeks, they had found no evidence to support the complaint. The case had been formally closed, the record annotated to reflect the outcome. Calvin Osei had resigned 4 months later. He had told his sister in a conversation he had not expected to become part of anyone else's story, that the 3 weeks of being investigated, the way people in the office looked at him differently, the way conversations stopped when he walked into rooms, the way the resolution, which cleared him completely, had somehow not managed to clear the air around him, had been the most humiliating experience of his professional life. He had not pursued legal action. He had thought about it, and then he had decided that without video footage, without a recording, without something objective and undeniable, it would simply be his word against hers, and he already knew what the value of his word was in a situation like that. He had left the firm. He had found another job. He had, in the way that people do with things they can't change, tried to put it somewhere it didn't press against him too often. He had seen the clip of Noah Carter being walked off Flight 882 that afternoon, sitting alone in his apartment with his phone, and something had cracked open inside him that he had kept carefully sealed for 18 months. Gerald Park was a defense attorney, but he was also, after 20 years in this work, a man with a finely calibrated sense of where things were going. He knew when Diane finished telling him about Calvin Osei exactly where this was going. He also knew, and this was the part that required him to sit quietly with something uncomfortable for a moment before doing it, that the ethical thing to do and the legally required thing to do were not in this instance the same thing, and that sometimes when they diverge, a person has to choose which side to stand on. He made a call. Not to Patricia Anand. He had no obligation to call opposing counsel, and he was clear-eyed about that. He called the federal prosecutor's office. He was precise and brief, and he gave them a name, and then he got off the phone and sat with the choice he had just made for approximately 30 seconds before moving on. Federal prosecutor Rebecca Shan had the contact information for Calvin Osei within 20 minutes of Gerald's call, and she had him on the phone within the hour. Calvin picked up. He had been sitting in his apartment since the clip appeared online, and when Rebecca introduced herself and explained why she was calling, the silence on the line had the specific quality of something that has been contained for a long time and is now carefully and with some effort being allowed to move. He gave his statement. He spoke for 41 minutes. He described the complaint in precise detail, the exact accusation, the investigation, the way the office had changed around him during those 3 weeks, the resolution that cleared him and changed nothing. He described leaving. He described the year that followed. He said, "I didn't think anyone would believe me. There was no footage. It was just my word, and I already knew what that was worth." Rebecca's associate, who was conducting the call while Rebecca listened on the second line, said quietly, "It's enough now." Calvin was quiet for a moment. Then he said, How is the boy? He's doing well. He's going to Boston. Calvin made a sound that was somewhere between a laugh and something that wasn't quite a laugh, something that had relief in it and grief in it, and the complicated particular feeling of being vindicated 18 months too late while someone else has to pay the same price you paid. Good, he said. That's good. He should get to go where he's going. When the call ended, Rebecca Shan looked at the notes in front of her for a long moment. What she had was no longer a single incident. What she had was a pattern, the same impulse, the same target, the same mechanism of accusation as punishment in two different professional contexts across 18 months. A prepaid phone bought in cash 5 weeks before the flight. A complaint filed against an employee who had done nothing and cleared of everything but never restored to what had existed before the accusation. The sentencing calculus had just changed significantly. Patricia's call came at 3:52 in the afternoon, and Raymond took it standing in the hallway outside the security office holding a cup of coffee that was fully cold now, watching through the small window, as Noah worked at the table, the pencil moving in the steady, confident way it moved when his mind had found the thread of something and was following it without hesitation. Calvin Osei, Patricia said. 27 years old. Former analyst at Holt's firm in Scottsdale. 18 months ago, she filed a misconduct complaint against him, accused him of accessing her files. The firm investigated, found nothing, closed the case. He resigned 4 months later. He's given a full statement to federal prosecutors. Raymond was quiet. This gives the prosecution what they need to demonstrate that the incident on the flight was not a spontaneous act. Patricia continued. It establishes a pattern of behavior, the same impulse directed at black individuals in positions she didn't expect them to occupy. Combined with the prepaid phone and the footage, this is an extraordinarily strong federal case. Raymond looked through the window. Noah had put the pencil down and was looking at something on the page with his head tilted slightly, the particular angle of a person who is looking at a thing from a slightly different direction to see if it reveals something new. He thought about Calvin Osei sitting in his apartment for 18 months with something he couldn't prove, with no footage, no air marshal, no 44 seconds of undeniable truth. Just his word and the knowledge of what had happened, and nowhere to put either of them that made any difference. He thought about how many Calvin Oseis there were in the world. How many people who had been through some version of this morning and had no Raymond Carter and no Patricia Anand and no Elliot Marsh with an earbud case on his tray table, just the thing itself and the silence that came after it. Will Calvin need to testify? He said. Possibly for the federal case. The prosecutor will decide. But even as a supporting statement, his account significantly changes the sentencing recommendation. Patricia paused. How do you want to handle this publicly? Carefully, Raymond said. Calvin's story is his to tell. I don't want him used as a vehicle for our case without his full understanding and consent. I'll speak with him directly, Patricia said. One more thing. Raymond turned away from the window so he was facing the corridor. How soon can you file the civil suit? Wednesday, Patricia said. Possibly Tuesday if we push. Push, Raymond said. I want it filed before the week is out. He went back into the room, sat beside Noah at the table. For a moment, neither of them spoke, and Noah kept writing, and Raymond let the room be quiet because sometimes quiet was what a room needed, and a father who understood his son understood when not to fill it. Then Noah set down his pencil and looked up and said, Dad, I think I'm almost done. Raymond looked at the page. The notation was dense and precise structures he couldn't decode the way Noah decoded them, but which he could recognize as having the quality of something that is approaching its conclusion. The way a piece of music has a particular quality in its final measures that tells you it is arriving somewhere even before it arrives. The one from this morning, Raymond said. The same one, Noah confirmed. He looked at the page for a moment. Then he picked up the pencil again. I'm going to finish it on the flight to Boston. Raymond looked at his son, this 9-year-old boy who had been through this particular morning and whose response to it, as soon as the immediate weight of it had been processed, was to go back to the problem, to return to the interrupted work, to refuse on some fundamental level to let the interruption be the final word on the morning. And he felt underneath all the other things he was feeling something steady and certain and so deep it didn't have easy language. "Then we are going to Boston," Raymond said. "And you're going to finish it." Noah adjusted his glasses, looked back at the equation. After a moment, quietly in the voice he used when he was saying something that was simply true rather than something he needed anyone to hear. "She didn't stop me." Raymond said nothing. He let the sentence be what it was. At 6:14 that evening, Elliot Marsh sat in his car in a parking structure near the FBI field office and typed a post on his personal social media account. He was not given to posting on social media with any regularity. He used it occasionally mainly to share photographs of things he found interesting, a particular sunset over Lake Michigan, a documentary he had watched that surprised him, and he had 847 followers who were mostly colleagues. A few old friends from before the job took over most of his time, and people who had stumbled onto his profile by accident and stayed for reasons he had never fully understood. He typed for about 7 minutes. Then he read it back once. Then he posted it. "I was on that flight this morning. I recorded what happened from start to finish. I gave the footage to federal authorities and gave my full statement this afternoon. I want the public to know one thing clearly: that 9-year-old boy never moved from his seat." He was reading. He was working on math problems in a notebook. He was quiet and polite, and he showed more composure under pressure than most adults I know would have managed. He was treated like a criminal because of what he looked like, not because of anything he did. I have been doing this job for 13 years. What I witnessed today was one of the most deliberate things I have seen on a commercial aircraft, not because of physical danger, but because of the intentionality of it. Someone chose to do this to a child. That choice needs to have real consequences. He put the phone in the cup holder, started the car, drove. Within 20 minutes, it had been shared 180,000 times. Within an hour, Elliot Marsh was being discussed on every platform simultaneously alongside Noah Carter and Diane Holt, and the character of that discussion was different from the others. Quieter in some ways, angrier in others, carrying the particular weight that belongs to a witness speaking in plain language without drama or agenda. In the security office, where Raymond and Noah were preparing to leave for the evening flight to Boston, an officer knocked and handed Raymond a printed copy of Elliot's post. Raymond read it once. Something happened to his hand. It tightened on the page slightly, a small involuntary tightening, and then he set it on the table and looked at it for a moment before taking it to Noah. "There's someone I want you to know about," he said. Noah read the post the way he read everything, completely every word without skipping. He handed it back. He saw Noah said. He saw Raymond said. Noah looked at his hands resting on the closed notebook. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter, not sad, not frightened, but carrying something that was working its way through him in real time, the way understanding moves through a person when they are finally allowed to stop being strong for a moment and just think. "On the plane," he said, when she walked back from the lavatory the second time, "I felt someone watching. Not the way the other passengers were watching, not watching the situation, watching it like they were tracking something. I didn't know who, but I felt it." He paused. "It helped." Raymond looked at his son. How did it help? Noah thought about it. When you know the truth and nobody else does, the truth starts to feel smaller. Like maybe it isn't as real as you thought. But when someone else knows it, when you can feel that they know it, it stays the right size. He paused again. I could hold on to it because he was holding on to it too. Raymond put his hand on the back of his son's neck for a moment. Just his hand, just contact. And then he said, "Your instincts are good. They always will be. trust them. Noah nodded. Then he picked up his pencil, turned to the page with the unfinished equation. And outside the door of that office, the world was moving faster and faster around the name of a 9-year-old boy who had only wanted to get to Boston. The evening flight to Boston departed Chicago at 6:55 p.m., and this time Noah Carter sat in seat 1A again. Raymond had considered briefly and seriously booking a different configuration, a different row, a different section, anything that would not carry the specific sensory memory of what had happened in this same position on the same airline earlier that day. He had thought about it for approximately 30 seconds, and then he had let the gate agent ask, and he had listened to his son's answer. Same seat, Noah said, without drama, without emphasis, with the matter-of-fact quality of someone stating a preference about something that is simply quietly non-negotiable. Raymond looked at his son when he said it and understood something that he filed carefully in the place where he kept the things about Noah that mattered most. This was not defiance. This was not performance. This was a 9-year-old boy doing the work of reclaiming something that had been taken from him without his permission, restoring something to its correct state, the way you reprove a theorem that someone has incorrectly challenged. Not because you need to perform the proof for anyone else, but because you know the proof is right, and you need the record to reflect that. A father with any sense at all does not interfere with that. Noah sat in 1A and opened his notebook to the page with the half-finished equation and picked up the pencil, and within 3 minutes he was writing the pencil, moving in that steady, unhurried, completely absorbed way that meant his mind had found the thread again and was following it at full speed. Raymond sat in 1B and did not read and did not look at his phone, not for the first 40 minutes of the flight. He sat and watched the country pass below in the darkening evening, and let the full weight of the day settle into the places where it would need to be carried, the handcuff marks on his son's wrists that had faded, but that Raymond would be seeing for a long time. The sound of the applause that had followed Noah down the jet bridge, the image of a 9-year-old boy folding his hands on top of a closed notebook and counting something silently with his lips because it was the only tool he had. Patricia was in 2A3 Associates feeding her information through her earpiece while she drafted on her laptop with the focused, relentless efficiency of a woman doing work she believes in completely. At 7:42 p.m., Noah set down his pencil. "Dad," he said. Raymond looked at him. "I finished it." Raymond looked at the page equations cascading across it in a precise, structured descent building towards something at the bottom of the page that had the quality of a conclusion of an arrival of a thing that has traveled from question to answer through every step in between without skipping any of them. "The one from this morning," Raymond said. "The one from this morning," Noah confirmed. He looked at it for a long moment. Then he closed the notebook. "I'm going to give it to Dr. Obi when we land." Raymond looked at his son in the window seat of this aircraft at 35,000 feet, with the dark country passing below and the equation finished and the day almost over, and he thought about that half-finished page sitting untouched in an interrogation room for an hour and 20 minutes while Noah counted primes. "You know what that is?" Raymond said. Noah looked at him. "That," Raymond said, "is exactly who you are." Noah was quiet for a moment. He looked at the closed notebook in his lap. Then he looked out the window at the dark below and the lights of some city they were passing over, scattered and various and small from this altitude, were moving beneath them in their ordinary way, indifferent and busy and going on. "She didn't stop me," Noah said. "No," Raymond said. "She didn't." Patricia Anand filed the civil suit on Wednesday morning at 9:17 a.m., and she filed it the way she did everything completely with precision, without leaving anything on the table that was hers to put on the table. 3 defendants, Diane Holt, the airline, and the Chicago O'Hare Airport Police Department. 1 plaintiff, Noah Carter. Damages sought $16 million, covering emotional distress, wrongful detention, civil rights violations under federal statute, and negligence on the part of the airline and law enforcement for placing a minor in physical restraints without conducting the basic investigation that was required of them before doing so. Raymond had discussed the number with Patricia the night before. He had said it wasn't about the money. She had said she knew. Then she had said, "But the number has to be felt. The only way an institution learns is when the lesson costs enough to be memorable." Raymond had said, "Make it memorable." By 10 a.m., it was on every major outlet in the country. By 11 a.m., the airline's stock had moved in the wrong direction. By noon, the airline's board was in an emergency session that their communications team was calling a routine review, and that was by every account from people inside that building not remotely routine. The federal arraignment went forward Thursday morning. Diane Holt entered the courtroom with Gerald Park beside her, pale and contained, and carrying the specific diminished quality of someone who has spent 4 days understanding the distance between who they thought they were and who they actually are. The charges were read: filing a false police report, child endangerment, interference with airline operations, making a false statement to a federal officer, and the 5th count, deliberate endangerment of a minor on an interstate commercial aircraft. The store security footage showing the cash purchase of the prepaid phone was entered into the record. Gerald had spent 3 days constructing explanations for it. Watching the judge's face when it was mentioned, he understood that none of those explanations were going to be sufficient. Bail was set at $250,000, passport surrendered, travel restricted. That afternoon, Rebecca Shan called Gerald with the cooperation offer, 2 counts minimum sentencing recommendation in exchange for a full public statement of responsibility. No equivocation, no framing. Plain language. Diane's own words. Gerald relayed it precisely. Diane listened without interrupting, which she had not done in any previous conversation with him since this had started. When he finished, she said, "A public statement." "Full acknowledgement," Gerald said. "What you did. Why it was wrong. In plain language, publicly." She was quiet for a long time. Gerald said, "There's also something I think you should know. Not for legal reasons. Just because I think you need to know it." He paused. The boy finished his equation. Diane said nothing. "He finished it on the second flight," Gerald said. "The one to Boston after everything that happened. He finished the problem he was working on when you took him off the plane, and he presented it to a room of MIT faculty the next morning, and they described it as work that went somewhere they hadn't been before." Another pause. "He's 9 years old, and he finished it." The silence on the line had a different quality now, not the silence of someone calculating, not the silence of someone constructing a position, just the silence of someone standing in the full light of something they have done and looking at it without being able to look away. "Set up the meeting," Diane said finally. Her voice was different. The certainty was gone, not replaced by guilt exactly, not yet, but by something that was at least honest, which was more than had been there before. The certainty that had carried her through every year of her life up to this week, and had been the thing she relied on most without ever examining it, had simply quietly gone. On Monday morning, Diane Holt sat across from federal investigators with Gerald Park beside her, and a glass of water she did not touch, and the prepared statement she had revised 3 times over the weekend, each revision moving it closer to the thing she had been resisting, and that Gerald had told her finally and directly she could not afford to resist anymore. She said she had acted deliberately. She said she had planted the phone. She said there was no justification for it, and no framing that made it something other than what it was. She said her actions came from an assumption she had made about Noah Carter, about what a child who looked like him was and wasn't capable of, about what presence in a first-class seat meant, about what the evidence of his own work entitled him to, and that the assumption was wrong in every way a person can be wrong about another person. She spoke carefully and steadily, reading from the paper, keeping to the words Gerald had helped her find. And then something happened that was not in the prepared statement, and that Gerald had not vetted, and that arrived unexpectedly even to him, from somewhere below the prepared version of herself that she had been managing for 3 days. She said, "He was solving equations." I walked past him, and he was solving equations, and I decided that wasn't possible. That a child who looked like him couldn't be doing what he was doing in the seat he was sitting in. She stopped, looked at her hands on the table. I am going to have to live with that. Not just what I did, what I thought before I did it. That's the part I can't draft a statement around. The room was quiet. Patricia Anand across the table wrote something on her legal pad without looking up. Gerald had been the one to tell Diane about the equation. He had told her on the phone the evening after the cooperation offer, not for strategic reasons, but because he thought she needed to know it that the boy she had pulled off a plane and handed to 2 officers while a cabin full of people applauded had gotten back on another plane and finished what she had interrupted, and then walked onto a university campus the next morning and presented it to a room full of people who had never seen anything like it. That was the moment Diane had said, when he told her. That was the moment she stopped arguing with herself about the meeting. Boston was cold and bright in the particular way Boston is cold and bright in November. A sky that is deeply, unambiguously blue in a way that makes every building and tree and person stand out against it with sharp, specific clarity. And Noah Carter walked onto the MIT campus for the first time in a fresh navy polo shirt. Sneakers he had cleaned himself at 6 a.m. at the bathroom sink, before Raymond was awake, moving through the early morning with the quiet, purposeful energy of someone who knows exactly where they are going and has been waiting to get there. Dr. Adayeze Obi was waiting at the entrance to the mathematics building, tall, gray-streaked locks, reading glasses pushed up on her head. The unhurried manner of a person who has spent 30 years thinking about very large things and has long ago stopped letting small urgencies change her pace. She shook Noah's hand with both of hers and said simply, "We are very glad you made it." "I'm glad too," Noah said. They walked inside together, and Raymond walked beside his son, and at the door of the seminar room where the program was beginning, Raymond stopped. He crouched down to Noah's level the way he had been crouching down to his level since Noah was 5 years old in a different airport on a different morning every time there was something important to say, and they looked at each other. "Go do what you came here to do," Raymond said. Noah straightened his glasses, looked at the door, looked at his father. "I finished the equation," he said. "I know," Raymond said. "Go show them." Noah pushed open the door and walked in. Raymond stood in the hallway for a long time after the door closed. He pressed the back of his hand to his mouth. He stood there without moving, and the hallway was quiet around him, and he did not need anyone to say anything to him, and there was no one there to say anything. And that was exactly right. Inside the seminar room, Noah presented the completed equation, the one finished on the second flight, after everything in front of Dr. Obi and 4 faculty members and 2 graduate students. And the room went quiet, in the particular way rooms go quiet, when they are absorbing something that has surprised them in a way they weren't expecting to be surprised. 3 questions, 5 follow-ups. Each one Noah answered in the same steady, direct voice he used for everything, without hesitation, without performance. After the session, Dr. Obi stood beside him at the whiteboard and said, "How long have you been working on this?" 11 days for the main part, Noah said. "The last section, the part that connects the 2 frameworks, I worked on that yesterday." "On the plane." She looked at him. She knew what had happened on that plane. She had read Raymond's statement and seen Elliot's post, and she had felt as a black woman who had spent 30 years in academic spaces that were not always ready for her the very specific anger that comes from recognizing a story you have heard in many forms over many years. "But you did finish it," she said. "On the second flight," Noah said. She repeated it softly as if setting it somewhere it would stay. "On the second flight." She looked at the whiteboard and then at the boy standing beside it, and then back at the whiteboard, and she said, "Noah, this goes somewhere we haven't been before." Noah looked at it. "I know," he said. It was not arrogance. It was just Noah applying the same logic he applied to everything, looking at a thing clearly and reporting what he saw. 3 weeks later, on a Saturday afternoon, with the November light going gold and long across the campus, Elliot Marsh arrived at the MIT guest house where Raymond had arranged a quiet meeting, just the three of them in a small common room with 2 chairs and a low table between them and the afternoon coming through the window at an angle that made everything look warmer than it was. Elliot was tall and quiet, with the particular stillness of a person who has spent years in contained spaces, learning that stillness is a form of attention. He shook Raymond's hand, firm and brief. Then he looked at Noah. Noah said without preamble, without waiting, "I felt you watching. On the plane when she walked back from the lavatory. I didn't know who you were, but I felt someone paying attention in a particular way, and it helped." Elliot's expression shifted. Something in it opened slightly, reached somewhere he hadn't expected to be reached. "How did it help?" "When you know the truth and nobody is looking," Noah said, "the truth gets smaller. It starts to feel like maybe you imagined it. But when someone else is watching, when you can feel that they know what you know, the truth stays the right size. I could hold on to mine because I could feel that you were holding on to it too." He paused. "You were in 4C. Elliot looked at him. "Yes. I couldn't see you. But I knew someone was there." Noah thought about this for a moment. It was enough. Elliot was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I should have moved faster. Before they put the handcuffs on you, I should have said something sooner." Noah considered this the way he considered everything, straight on, without flinching, looking at the actual shape of the thing. "Then do it sooner. Next time," he said. Not cold, not dismissive, simply the logical conclusion: an error has been identified, it should be corrected going forward, here is the correction. The same way he handled a wrong step in an equation, not with anger, but with the clean directness of someone who is interested in getting the right answer. Something passed between Elliot and Raymond over the top of Noah's head, wordless, complete the kind of communication that requires no translation. Noah opened his notebook. He turned to the page with the completed equation and set it on the table between them and said, "I want to show you something." Elliot looked at it. He was not a mathematician. He could not read it the way Noah read it. But he looked at it with the same careful, patient attention he gave to everything, taking in the structure of it, the density of it, the sense of something that had been built with great care toward a specific destination. "What is it?" he said. "A proof. For a problem that's been open for about 30 years. The part I worked on connects 2 frameworks that people thought were separate. Nobody had connected them before, and you connected them. On the second flight." Neither of them said anything else. The sentence was complete as it was. Noah tore the page from the notebook carefully, the way you tear a page when the edge matters, when you want it clean. He held it out to Elliot. "I want you to have it," he said, "because you were there, and because your watching was part of how I finished it. When I knew you knew the truth stayed real. And when the truth stayed real, I could keep going." Elliot held the page the way you hold something you understand the weight of. He looked at it for a long moment. Then he folded it carefully and placed it inside his jacket against his chest. He looked at Noah. "Keep going," he said. "I will," Noah said. Diane Holt was sentenced 6 weeks after the cooperation agreement in a federal courtroom in Chicago, where the proceedings had the particular compressed gravity of a consequence that has been coming for a long time and is finally exactly arriving. 2 counts. 13 months federal minimum security facility in Arizona. Gerald stood beside her. She looked straight ahead and said nothing beyond what was required, and she was smaller than she had been on the morning she boarded Flight 882. Smaller in all the ways that have nothing to do with physical size and everything to do with what a person loses when the story they have been telling themselves about who they are for 50 years turns out to be wrong. The judge, before pronouncing the sentence, paused and said 8 words that were quoted in every report filed that day: a child was made to suffer for no reason. Outside the courtroom, Patricia Anand gave a brief statement. Justice was partial, but it was real and documented. The foundation being established in Noah Carter's name would ensure that the next family facing this situation would not face it alone. The airline had settled. The police department had revised its protocol for unaccompanied minors in writing and published the revision publicly. Noah was not present, by his own choice. He was at home in his room in Washington with his notebook open on his desk and a new problem in front of him, one of 3 that Dr. Obi had given him when the program ended, and the one he had known immediately from the first time he read the description of it that he was going to work on first. On the morning of sentencing, Raymond was at the kitchen table with coffee that was actually hot, reading Patricia's statement before she delivered it. His phone lit up with a message from Noah's room. "I think I have it." Raymond set down the coffee. He typed back, "Show me when you're ready." 3 minutes passed. Then the sound of Noah's door opening and footsteps across the hallway, and Noah came into the kitchen with the notebook open and set it on the table in front of his father. Raymond looked at the page. He couldn't read the mathematics the way Noah read it, but he could read his son, and what he saw on Noah's face was the specific, clean, particular light of someone who has found the answer, who has traveled from the question all the way through to the truth and arrived and knows it, and is at rest in that knowledge. "Is that it?" Raymond said. "That's it." Raymond looked at the page, looked at his son, looked at the page again. "Then write it clean," he said. "Every detail. So it lasts." Noah sat down across from him. He opened to a fresh page. He put the pencil to the paper. The boy who had been told by a stranger's certainty and a cabin full of applause that he did not belong. The boy who had counted primes in an interrogation room to keep himself together when the world was coming apart around him. The boy who had finished his equation on a second flight because the first one had been taken from him. That boy sat at his kitchen table across from his father and opened his notebook to a fresh page and put his pencil to the paper and began to write. And no one, not Diane Holt, not the passengers who had applauded, not the officers who had reached for the handcuffs before they asked a single question, not anyone in the world could take any of that away from him. Not now. Not ever. Because Noah Carter had always belonged exactly where he was, and now the world knew it too. If this story moved you, please subscribe to our channel and share it, because every child who has ever been looked at like a problem instead of a person deserves to have their story travel as far as it can go.